Cool. Hello everyone. Welcome to the first Tournesol talk of 2026. So, Tournesol talks are public online conferences in which experts and researchers talk about their work related to ethics, information, algorithm, recommender system, democracy, ecology, and much more. For those who do not know Tournesol is a transparent participatory research action project about the ethics of algorithm and recommendation system. So to put it in a nutshell, we try to develop recommendation system which strengthen democracy instead of destroying it, like it seems to do right now, according to more and more papers. So we are more than happy to welcome Philine Widmer today, and she will present her most recent work published in Nature some weeks ago, and which you must have seen. Personally, I have like 5 independent people who send me this paper saying you must read this. You will be very, very interested. And the paper is about the political effect of X feed algorithm. And just before Philine is going to present her work, just to let you know that next week we will have another Tournesol talk at 8 p.m. next Monday, and it will be about a paper titled "You Don't Bring Me Flowers: Mitigating Unwanted Recommendations Through Conformal Risk Control." And the author will be in the Tournesol talk talking about it, Giovanni De Toni. And the week after, so in 2 weeks' time, we will have Peter Thunberg, and the author of a book called Seeing Like a Platform, inspired by the title Seeing Like a State by James Scott. And he will talk about his work as well in 2 weeks' time. So I think I've said enough. So Philine, if you want to start and present your amazing paper that everyone is talking about since some weeks on LinkedIn, at least. I mean, that's where I saw several description of it. So please feel free. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very happy to present this paper. I'm not sure I configured this platform out very fine. So no, I don't see you anymore. So if you have any questions when I go into full screen, you would have to interrupt me on the spot, essentially. I wouldn't see the chat. So as Jean-Louis said, this paper is titled "The Political Effects of X's Feed Algorithm." We've also talked about recommender algorithms in the introduction, and one conceptual distinction we're making here is that because there are different algorithms present on the X platform, and the one we're looking at is the one that orders the content for you on the news feed. But we will see that just in a second. Maybe to give you a brief overview. So this paper, it was published in February in Nature. And since then, we've engaged in quite a bit of media discussions and online discussions. And so I'm actually also very curious to talk to you about this and to hear a bit your thoughts on where you think this type of research is going and how you think it relates to the public debate.
Okay.
I don't have to tell you much about this. I think we already know that social media is transforming human lives. We know that increasingly people all around the globe, they use social media not just to connect with others and to entertain themselves, but also to learn about the world, which by extension also means to learn about the political world. So increasingly platforms like X that we hear, but also like the Meta platforms and increasingly even large language models, they play an important role in shaping political news consumption. And this is with a somewhat of a question mark, also potentially political opinions, which is what the paper today is about. And so obviously these platforms, they can't exist without algorithms because the amount of content is just too vast. So we need something that somehow organizes what content is shown to whom. And so modern social media is just unthinkable without these feature algorithms, at least at the moment. I mean, it wouldn't be possible to just have all the content, to see all the content. So what platforms do is they personalize the content. And one complication that we have from a societal perspective is that by and large, the bread and butter of these platforms is to increase engagement due to ad revenues. So their business model, contrary to like traditional media firms in many cases, that really have as a core mission to like inform people, these platforms, their core business model is to maximize engagement. And one implication of this is that we don't really know, because these algorithms are also very complex, we don't really know what are all the correlates of this engagement. What we had before, a bit in the earlier days of social media, is that content was shown in simple reverse chronological order, meaning that you choose some accounts that you follow, and then when you come online on the platform, you will just see the most recent posts by the people or the entities that you chose to follow. And this has changed a bit over time, but at the time in 2023, when we were doing the study, X was one of the few platforms which let users choose between having this algorithmically curated feed and a reverse chronological order. Around this algorithmic curation of feeds and in general the spread of algorithms in like socially relevant contexts, I think in this crowd I don't have to, you will know most of these sites, but increasingly there have been worries that algorithms may have adverse effects on democratically important outcomes such as social cohesion, trust. Also, this one of these like potential correlates of the engagement maximization is that the information that is spread, it might not necessarily be true information, because perhaps misinformation is more exciting, more engaging. The same might hold for toxic content, could be more engaging. And there's this other challenge when news consumption is very personalized, in the sense that I'm no longer seeing the same news as my neighbor or my family member, my friends, etc. This might lead to filter bubbles where people consume very specific types of content. So what was somewhat striking to us when we started getting more deeply into this literature is that by and large, people agree that the internet and social media have important political effects. So we have what economists call like these reduced form effects. And so in the aggregate, we typically observe that the spreading of certain platforms and technologies, they do have some downstream political effects. But at the same time, before our study, we didn't really have this quantitative evidence that these feed algorithms that are so prominent nowadays, they do shape political opinions. And most notably, there was this study by a large group of researchers in collaboration with Meta, and they studied the Meta platform, so specifically Facebook and Instagram during the 2020 election in the US. And because the default that on the Meta platforms at the time was the algorithm, they could only study one direction. So they could, in the context of this research, switch off the algorithm for their treatment group. And they found that this doesn't really change political opinions. They did find that it changes the content that people see, but they didn't have measurable effects on political opinions, which was seen as or I think the evidence was credible in the sense that the sample was very big. So there was high confidence in concluding that probably there were no effects. So we see there's a bit this tension, because we have this reduced form evidence, we have all this anecdotal evidence that these algorithms and specifically feed algorithms matter, but we didn't really have the quantitative evidence. And this being said, I think in general it's tricky to study these effects. First of all, because the question is regarding like how do you implement it? And as I said before, on X, there was this choice between the two feed settings. And so this actually allows you, even without platform cooperation, to study this, which at the time of this study on the Meta platforms in 2020 wouldn't have been possible on the Meta platforms because they didn't have this option to switch between feeds. Now, even if you do have this opportunity from a platform perspective, these types of studies, they tend to be costly because you need to recruit participants, you need to pay them, you might have issues around compliance, etc. And I think that another concern that we might have, and we're not fully solving it in this study either, is that a lot of the societal effects of algorithms that we suspect might be things that accrue over a month or years. And in these study contexts, for the constraints that I have outlined before, notably budget, we typically can't follow people over years. We can't randomize them into different settings over years. So with this like previous puzzle, there was this question in the room. So algorithms, or feed algorithms specifically, really they don't have an impact on political opinions. And what's like the entire or like what's a very important aspect of our study is that we show switching the algorithm off is not the same as switching it on. And in fact, we do replicate the findings of this study on the Meta platforms. On X, when the algorithm is turned off, we also don't find effects, just to like foreshadow that. And so what we can show is that this initial exposure to the algorithm may have persistent effects that may not be easily reversed. And what's interesting for me is because from a scientific perspective, to us, it was always clear that this is, in some sense, the main contribution of the paper. And before the talk, Jean-Loup, you wrote me an email and you told me, like, maybe we should really, in this talk, emphasize this asymmetry, because of a lot of the discussions online, they have revolved around this punchline that X makes you right-wing.
Exactly.
Yes, and that's really interesting for us, because from our like scientific perspective and the way we have presented this paper in scientific like conferences, seminars, etc., we've always focused on this asymmetry, and we were also to some extent maybe not surprised, but it did also come to our attention that that the way this was perceived was much more along this punchline way of like, okay, so X makes you right-wing. And what's also interesting, and now I'm still a bit in my detour of like the media attention. What's also interesting is, of course, that the reactions to this punchline, like does the algorithm make you right-wing, they were obviously strongly correlated with people's political orientation. So people on the right were like, yeah, so what? And people on the left, they were very worried, like, okay, it can't be that we just have this platform that like now pushes everybody to the right. And in some sense, we really, really appreciate this debate that surrounds this paper. And we're very grateful that people are interested and kind of discuss it. But somehow if we could change a thing, we would probably wish for more attention to go to this deeper point about, okay, these feed algorithms, they're not politically neutral. And in this specific case, depending on where you stand in the political spectrum, you might have different feelings about this paper. But the kind of deeper underlying point that this is the first quantitative evidence to show that these feed algorithms are not politically neutral, I think this should probably strike a chord with many people, because they're very opaque algorithms, very untransparent. So there's this like more like mechanical challenge that I've touched upon earlier to understand to begin with. Like, okay, you drive you maximize engagement, but what does this mean for like socially relevant outcomes? But then there's also this like additional layer that the platforms, they also might have a political agenda in addition. And we can't really distinguish between the two. So we can't really claim that the effects that we find, they're really like specifically tied to any political agenda. We can't rule out that this correlates of engagement. But yeah, I mean, my point is a bit like, irrespective of where you stand politically, this kind of deeper finding, it in our opinion, should still resonate with you.
And the reception in itself is interesting here. the reception of the paper says something about what the paper is trying to say. So I think it's deeply interesting what you're saying.
Yeah,
Lelia?
yeah. Actually, for us, it was the same. Like we we enjoy reading the newspaper articles about the study, just to like see how different
Yeah,
outlets or like what they emphasize. Because I
yeah,
mean, as all these papers, there's like dozens of pages of appendix, and there's so many results that we ran. But somehow, different audiences they do take different messages from this study. Of course,
Yeah,
yeah. Please.
yeah. So I find it very fascinating, this asymmetry, because it's it undermines some other papers that would have done the switching off. Uh, my question is, like, did you expect it? Like, how did you come up with the? Did you were you searching for this, or was it more like trying different things?
Yeah, and so we had pre-registered that like the previous setting would be one of the heterogeneity margins. Um, so in that sense, we had this like hypothesis that it could be an important margin. Obviously, we didn't like pilot or anything beforehand, so we didn't have like strong kind of quantitative evidence or anything to suggest that we would find this heterogeneity. So in that sense, we were also we were impressed in some sense by the empirics, because you'll see it after in the result. It's really striking. Like if you look at the coefficients for like the turning on, in the coefficient plots, like everything is kind of on the positive side of zero for like turning it on, but really like around zero for turning it off. And both for the like survey based outcomes, where we ask people for their opinions on different policy issues and things like partisanship, etc. But also when we look at the accounts that people follow. And here, just as a small disclaimer, we don't at all claim that this is like the end of the story, or that like a kind of the debate is settled, because the platforms are very dynamic, the contexts are dynamic, and there's before, as societies, we don't better understand the mechanisms of how these political effects that have now been documented for the first time come about. I think it's really hard to make like general predictions about what will happen in general with these types of algorithms. So we strongly advocate for some kind of like ongoing monitoring of these platforms for such democratically relevant outcomes. Yes, so I think I've led you to it. The research question: does the feed algorithm on X affect users' online behaviors and political opinions? And so the case of X, as I've hinted at before, part of why we studied X is also because we could. And I think in that sense, it's interesting to see this European increasing interest in Europe, at least, for legislation. And that also, among other things, requests for users to have a choice between algorithms and chronological feeds, because in the first place, this is the type of thing that made a study like this possible. So when we ran this study, around 27% of the US adults, they were on X. And it, contrary to some other platforms, X is very strong on the politics. So a lot of people do use X to consume news on politics. In the case of X, we also have this tension that the owner at the time, Elon Musk, very openly expressed his political views. So, as I said before, we can't fully disentangle this like correlates of engagement versus ownership agenda, ownership-based agenda. But in some sense, whether it's like a conscious agenda or not, it's still the somewhat like deeper point might still be unsettling, because it is a platform that can influence many people, and it's owned by one person in that case, and so it's like a huge share of the information sphere that is controlled by a very small circle of people. So in general, again, I'm like re-emphasizing this need to really discuss these feed algorithms a bit irrespective of where you stand politically. Now, regarding the specifics of the study, so the observation period was in summer 2023. As I said before, this is like a collaboration of researchers that was funded by public funds, so specifically the Swiss National Science Foundation. And we recruited around 5,000 US-based users, and then we randomized them into either using the algorithmic feed or the chronological feed for these 7 weeks. And so this randomization interacted with the previous setting with which the people came to us, because some people, before coming to our study, they used X on the chronological feed predominantly, others used it on the algorithmic feed predominantly. So this gives us essentially 4 groups to look at. So those who came on the chronological feed were again assigned by us to the chronological feed, or those who came on the chronological feed were assigned to the algorithmic feed, and the same for those who had as an initial feed the algorithm. We collaborated with YouGov to recruit these people, and we have these survey-based outcomes that I've mentioned before. So first of all, we ask about user experience, which is mostly like how often do you use the platform and do you enjoy your experience on the platform. We have some general political attitudes, such as the partisanship, on which, by the way, we don't find effects. And we also have some questions about policy priorities. So what type of subject areas would you like the government to deal with mostly? And we had options like, on the one hand, like inflation or crime, or that are more associated with the right wing, or education or healthcare, and others that are more associated with the left wing. And I think like talking about like the media reception, one thing we would also like to emphasize here is that we don't make any value judgments in this paper about like what's left wing or right wing. So we defined what are like left wing or right wing priorities based on like the partisanship that people reported in the baseline here. And then I think another important margin of innovation, or at least what we think is part of the innovation of this study too, is that we also look at these current news-related political opinions, specifically about the criminal investigations into Donald Trump that were happening at that time, and some questions surrounding the war in Ukraine. Because our thinking was also that it might be hard to detect effects on more deeply held concepts like partisanship, and by extension, affective polarization. So how warmly you feel about your in-group relative to the out-group in a partisan sense here, by just like following people for 7 weeks. But we felt that perhaps on the opinions about things that really happened in the news at the time, it might be possible to detect something. And we can't prove that this will accumulate over a longer time in potentially even more significant outcomes, like you kind of changing your partisan affiliation. But at least it's suggestive, in the sense that so far we thought that, okay, maybe these feed algorithms, they don't matter at all. They essentially just match people with contents that they would have wanted. And now the fact that we do find this effect on like the more kind of arguably more malleable outcomes, but not on the partisanship, I think it would be something that would be interesting to study in a more long run period. We also looked at well-being, but just to kind of save your mental energy, you can forget about it again, because we don't really find anything on well-being. So I'm not going to be talking about this much. For a subsample of participants, we also collected data on the content of the feeds that they actually saw. So in your experiment, you could opt in to run a Chrome extension that kind of looked at your feed for you under both settings. So it means for the same participants, we see what they saw at the time. So the first 100 posts that they saw under the algorithmic feed, and the first 100 posts that they saw on the chronological feeds. And people could also opt in to provide us with their user name. So then we could scrape them and understand what type of accounts they followed. So what are our main effects? We find that replacing the algorithmic feed by this chronological feed has no effect. And in that sense, our results, they're fully compatible with these earlier studies that did not find an effect. What we do find, however, is that when we also look at this other direction of change, turning the algorithm on, we find this shift to the right. Another finding that was a bit unsettling, perhaps. I mean, again, depends a bit what's your opinion, but I think for me as a media economist was one of the more unsettling parts of our finding is that we also find that it demotes traditional media. So we find that the algorithm promotes political activists, especially right-wing political activists, and so there's really a very, very strong effect. You're much less likely to see traditional media on the algorithm than you are on the chronological feed. And when we talk about combating misinformation, this kind of important aspect of the media being acting as a fourth estate, this can be seen as problematic. And I think it's one of the more important findings of this study. And the mechanism, so now you might wonder, okay, why do we have this asymmetry? And what our evidence suggests is that, so when we look at the accounts that people follow, we find that turning on the algorithm leads you to follow more conservative accounts, and in particular conservative political activist accounts. But when the algorithm is turned off, we don't find an effect in the other direction, which is consistent with the algorithm showing you certain accounts that you don't follow yet, and you start following them. And then when you switch back to the chronological, it's just empirically, it doesn't really seem to be the case that people actively start unfollowing accounts that they followed earlier through the algorithmic exposure. I think we largely covered this. Something that I feel like I would like to briefly mention is this study by Huzar and others that appeared in 2022 in PNAS. And they had some of these co-authors, they were at Twitter at the time, and they studied the introduction of the algorithm in 2016. So before that, it was just reverse chronological only. And they found that the algorithm promoted more conservative content already then. And importantly, they don't have any political opinions, but just in terms of content, they had found it already then. As I said before, it's really hard to make very broad claims, because another issue that we have is that these algorithms, they change daily, more or less, in some sense, or at least we don't know when they change and by how much, etc. So I think I already said most of this. Yes, maybe about attrition. So we do have some attrition, and we run a couple of checks, like rebounds. We look at also whether you switch or not impacts compliance. So there's really, as I said, the appendix is very, very long. And so there's a lot of robustness checks around that, because obviously that's another cost that you pay in some sense by not working with the platform, because you can't enforce compliance. People, so if you tell them to switch the feed, you need to ensure that they will actually do it. And people may just not come back. But as I said, it's not what drives our effects, but it's clearly something to check. Typically for our main specification, we use this equation. So we have this placeholder for the different outcomes that we look at. And essentially, we have two betas that interest us. The first one is where we turn on the algorithm. So we interact, you being initially on the chrono feed, with being assigned to the algorithmic treatment, and the other one, so the control group for this one would be the people who came on the initial chrono but would stay on the chrono. And then we have the effect in the other direction, where you're initially on the algorithm and then you're assigned to the chronological feed. where like being initially on the algorithm would be your comparison group. Here you see some outcomes, just the raw means, just to give you a bit of a sense. So a very important and very robust finding is that people start using X more. So we have this this measure where we say they use X to equally or more than before. We have now regarding the political outcomes, we look at these like policy priorities, as I said before, just in terms of topics that are important for the people that people want the government to address. To have these questions about the Trump investigations, how they feel about Vladimir Zelensky, leader of Ukraine. And here in the last two columns, you see these are not survey-based, these are the accounts that people follow. So we see that you become, with this like switching on of the algorithm, you become more likely to follow conservative accounts, and in particular political activist accounts, and we will show in the data that it's like conservative political activist accounts. Since we may not go through all the slides in detail that we have to leave enough time for the discussion, but in case you're wondering how we annotated these accounts, we use different methods for that. So our main measure is that we used LLMs to annotate it, but we extensively validated it against these annotations, against human annotations. And we also replicated all results using more traditional machine learning methods, where we take tweets from Congress people as a training data set, and then predict the leaning of content based on that. So here you see our coefficient plot. So these are all standardized effects. Here in the main part, we grouped the different blocks of the survey into one overarching measure with PCA. So you see the different questions on user engagement that mostly encompassed both like passive and active use. So how often are you on X, and how often do you post on X? For partisanship, so we have what you identify with and this measure of affective polarization. Here we have the top issues that you choose for policy priorities. For Trump, we had 4 different questions that we had reused from an earlier YouGov survey. And to give you an example, the question where we found the strongest effect is, do you think that the criminal investigations into Donald Trump undermine or uphold the rule of law? And then you could choose between the two, like undermine or uphold. And we coded them such that one would always be the kind of Trump supporting answer. We had a battery of questions about Ukraine, such as this aforementioned sentiment towards Zelensky. We had sentiment towards Putin, and a couple of additional questions around this conflict. And then we have this PCA where we group all these current political opinions. And at the end of the day, we also look at well-being, which we just like recoded as low well-being. And as you can see, we don't really find anything. In terms of effect sizes, I think in like psychology, for example, we typically say that if the standardized effects are below like 0.20, it's considered rather small effects. So in that sense, the effects are certainly not super large. It's still we still think they should be taken seriously. So first of all, because this is over 7 weeks, and in practice, people, as we said, they use these algorithms over very long time periods. And second of all, our sample wasn't particularly that big, especially not among these switchers in that direction. Because recall that on X, I mean, it still is, and it already was at the time, the default setting was the algorithmic feed. So most of the people who came to our study, they had been on the algorithmic feed. So the pool we could choose from to measure this like turning on of the algorithm was smaller than on this side. So just from like a pure kind of statistical power perspective, if anything, we should find the results here and not here. So in that sense, the effects might not be very big, but yeah, they are still present. I'm not going to click on all these buttons here. I mean, we can visit them as the questions come up in the discussion. But so we have ample robustness checks, and we do find that's perhaps interesting. We find that the effects are driven by Republicans and independents, which makes sense with a lot of what we know from the persuasion literature, that oftentimes you need to have some predisposition towards certain ideas to be persuaded. Next, I'm going to briefly show you the content that the algorithm promotes. So this content-based analysis, it's from this Google Chrome extension data. We see for each post the number of likes, reposts, and comments at the time. And we then apply these text as data measures that I mentioned before to the post text, where we want to infer different things. First of all, the partisanship. So is it like liberal, conservative, or none of the two? And we also annotate account types. So is this a news outlet? Is this a political activist, entertainment account, an official account, along these lines? And so first, what we find, and that's in some sense very reassuring, we find that the algorithm is much, much more likely to show posts that already had accumulated a lot of likes, reposts, and comments. And why do I say this is reassuring? It's reassuring in the sense that I think I would have questioned our research design if we hadn't found this. Because as we said before, this is the bread and butter of these feed algorithms. So in some sense, we really expect to find this. Now, when we look at political content, we see that the algorithm in general is more likely to show political content, especially conservative political content. We also have a bit of a differential here for liberal content, but it's less pronounced. And when you move to using fixed effects, for example, so you really observe for the same user, it's much less significant. And in particular, if you zoom in on the universe of political content, you see that conservative content is preferred. Now you see that like you're much more likely to see political activists. So now we're talking about account types on the algorithm, and we see political activists of both partisan leanings. For the algorithm, when we will look at the accounts that people follow, we will only find the effects for the conservative activists. And some people have asked us like why the liberal content has higher absolute values here. And it's just important to keep in mind that these panels, like on YouGov, etc., they tend to skew liberal. So we just have more liberals in our sample, and we do find that the liberals see more liberal content on the algorithm than conservatives. So this is just explained by the composition of the sample. And so if we start to look at it separately, you can see this point that I just made about like Democrats seeing more liberal content, obviously much more liberal content than Republicans or independents, which by the way are grouped together for like sample size reasons, and because their effects, even if you look at them individually, point in the same direction. And the same for the political activist results. Yes, and as I said before, one of the other perhaps, I mean, I would argue important findings, this demotion of news outlets. So what you could consider like traditional news in the sense that they're like established news organizations and not like bloggers or activists of some sort. Here you see these are not the survey based, these are not survey based, but like actually observed accounts that people follow. And you can see here that so we made these annotations at the account level. You can see that among these accounts that you are induced to follow due to the algorithmic exposure, those tend to be accounts with a higher share of conservative content. And these tend to be political higher share of political activists among the accounts you follow. And in particular here, as I said before, it's really driven by conservative activists. Here for the news outlets and entertainment, we don't really find significant effects. So the bottom line here is really you start to follow more conservative political activists. Of course, who provided their handle to us was non-random because we couldn't enforce that. So we run a couple of checks to ensure that this is not just a sample composition effect. And last but not least, what we also looked at, because we do have this content data, and in some sense, this is complementary to the check with the accounts that people follow. We looked at the chronological feed and whether the chronological feed in the post-treatment period was more right-wing if you were treated, because that's essentially really like a robustness check on the following. Because now X, like if you go on X now, even if you go on the chronological one, there's some like algorithmic curation to it, and you really have to like click twice to have the pure chronological one. But at the time, the chronological feed was really just like some kind of like frequency weighted representation of your following list. So we can do two things. We can show this, that kind of turning on the algorithm, it makes your chronological feed more right-wing in wave 2. But what's also nice here is that we can do a placebo. So we can also take this data from wave 1, where people had just been assigned, like within the same survey session, to this treatment. And we see it's not driven by like these feeds having been different to begin with. So let me conclude. The main finding is that switching the algorithm on does change political opinions, but turning it off does not. We show by looking at the content that indeed the algorithm promotes conservative contents and the accounts of political activists while demoting traditional media. And the mechanism we propose for this, based on our data, for this asymmetry between like turning on and off, is this persistency through the list of accounts that you follow. And some broader lessons that we have drawn from this study is that obviously we need to look at both directions, so we can't necessarily expect a symmetry. And I think I already mentioned this earlier, but I think there's really this practical constraint of how can we measure these effects. And I mean, one literature that we really speak to is like the importance of accounts that you follow, and that investigating this more closely probably also deserves more research. So I'm going to stop sharing now so that I can see you again. And I'm very
Thanks.
happy.
It was
Here
very interesting. So if anyone has questions or remarks, please feel free. I have some, and I think many of us we have. So yeah, Christian.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, you should also see me. Thanks for the nice presentation. I had a couple of questions. First one is, so if I understood, you were collecting through this Chrome extension the posts that the user were seeing. Did you collect also the sponsored or promoted post? And If so, do you have anything to say about those? So this is my first question. And the second question was if you were able to do any follow-up with your participants to ask them if they realized that they were getting this effect. Did they realize that they were following more conservative account? Did they feel that they were seeing more conservative news or not?
Both great questions. So the sponsored posts, the answers are no and no. We didn't collect them, so I can't say anything about them. Regarding the follow-up, we didn't do what you had in mind. So we didn't ask them about their experience. We have quite an extensive discussion about it regarding the ethics of it, because we might have really changed the information diet of some people. What we did try is we recontacted YouGov after the election in 24. We asked them about the election. So we explored some possibilities to analyze the how do you say, sorry, like the reported voting of these people. Just turned out that data was scarce. So they had it because people kind of, not everybody takes surveys, people leave these panels, so we wouldn't really have had a lot of data available. So we didn't investigate this further to like kind of discuss with IRB how to extend the study in this direction. So yeah, maybe not the answers you hoped for, but that's what I can offer.
Thanks.
Maybe someone else.
A question I have is how challenging was it to have the IRB?
So the IRB per se was pretty okay. I think the biggest challenge was around because anything that is just like survey based, that's easy because we can't really identify the participants. What was trickier was regarding the news feeds, because in theory you could get some like identifiable cues and the handles. So for the handles, YouGov just requested that we make it A, optional, and B, don't incentivize it, so that we don't like pay people to give us their handle. It was really framed like it, you want to further help our research by providing your handle. And for the feed data, we just had very strict regulations regarding like how we could collect the data, how we could store it, for how long we could keep it, etc. So yeah, I feel like the awareness grows. So I have some like ongoing studies now, and it's a good thing, but it's definitely something that is also really a learning curve. Like you need to talk to your data protection officer, to the IRB, etc. And I think it's one of the other things. It's good that researchers are requested to do it, but I think it also puts again a bit of a wedge between what the companies can do and how much you can do as a researchers, because for very good reasons, and I'm fully on board with it. We should behave ethically, but I think the companies should too, because otherwise it's very unfair. We're essentially trying to like reverse engineer what they do, and we just have much higher standards in how like we can and cannot do.
So we had one previous project with the EPFL, and essentially the IRB, they said that the Tournesol Association was going to handle a lot of the messy data protection stuff, and this was a way for them to facilitate the IRB.
Okay.
And then I have a question about that as well. Like I see, like your paper, a part of it you explain there is a navigator or browser extension that you developed in order to know what was the content of the post and everything. And I think there is another very interesting paper that maybe you read. It's called the Social Media Algorithm Can Shape Affective Polarization via Exposure to Anti-Democratic Attitudes and Partisan Animosity by Picardi and al. And they've done as well the development of browser extension, and it feels like me for a researcher in that topic, they will have to develop more and more extension because that's maybe the most effective way to get data from this kind of platform, because you don't get them like in a normal or a classical way. So my question would be, like, is there like a consortium or organization of researchers developing a browser extension? Because it will be the main job of researcher methodologically now will be to develop this kind of extension. So I don't know, maybe we can wait, or you can wait to get the data from the platform. But I think more and more what researchers are going to do is like develop this kind of extension. What was your discussion about the development of an extension in your team?
Yeah, so I mean, given that it was a Google Chrome extension, from a technical perspective, it wasn't super hard to do it. I think one question we always stumble upon, and I say always because like by now I have started in a lot of like similar projects, and like one challenge we always have is that it's much easier to get data from desktop, like when you're on desktop in the social media app. And this, I mean, from a social science perspective, it just creates a representation problem because it's just a very selected subsample of people who you can like see to begin with. I mean, it's a challenge. I haven't solved it. We now have a like very early stage project where we want to look at like LLM use, and it's essentially the same problem. Like, how could you get people to kind of share their data with you? How can you do that like on the phone? So that's a representation concern. Now, regarding the coordination point, there are some interesting initiatives going on. So there is this, it's called Accelerator, coming out of Princeton, which is exactly what you mentioned, like a big consortium of universities that are trying to coordinate better on social media research, precisely for the reasons that you have hinted at. Because like as the companies get bigger, maybe the research groups should become bigger and better organized. So I think there is a bit of an awakening among social scientists. Then again, I mean, as a caveat to that, with like the tools in particular, what we found is that it's a bit buggy, as you can imagine, because the source code changes all the time. So there's also, I mean, you still, maybe now with Cloud Code a bit less so, but I mean, at the end of the day, you still have some like ongoing development effort to make them useful. And I mean, I would have some more stories to tell about like how we kind of got the following list and stuff, and how it was buggy because it was at the time where they were like essentially refactoring their website daily and stuff. So I think there is a bit of overhead just from a technical perspective to do these things. And I think it's good that researchers coordinate more on this.
What was the name of the organization you said who was doing the
Accelerator?
Accelerator.
Accelerator.
I mean, if
other question maybe, or
no, so I'm just like, it's a bit of excursus, but if you're interested, I can also like put you in touch, because PSC, where I'm currently at, they also are part of this wider consortium, and I mean,
it'd be interesting to know.
And it's because as well in Tournesol, Tournesol, we do the same thing. Like, we develop an extension because that's the only way as well to make something different from YouTube. And we have the same problem that you mentioned. It's like people using Tournesol, they're using Tournesol on desktop, and it's and that's a special kind of people, and it's less and less and less representative, because more and more people are actually using and browsing from a smartphone. So it's less and less relevant, actually, like the desktop.
And that's why we also developing an application.
I just mean that historically, and the extension thing is not enough, even if it's.
But I think like developing the application. I mean, one of the things we want to do with Tournesol as well is to make it a usable tool for research. And so, like through the application, we could like, well, I mean, we're still trying to acquire more users and stuff like this, but I think it would be interesting to look into potential, like, you could do a randomized control trial if you control the algorithm and the platform and the application.
Yeah, I think this would be really cool. Out of interest for the application, so would you like code a standalone application, or were you thinking of some kind of like browser wrapper that would still kind of put Tournesol on top of like another platform, but you would just access it through the app, or like how would this work?
So it's a progressive web application. I don't know if you know. It's essentially a web page, but you can turn it into an application, like, and it's like in the Play Store. So it is like a button. So it's used like an application.
Okay,
But it
so
opens
yeah, that's
the
actually
website.
what I meant. I probably wasn't using like the exact terminology, but the understanding is you essentially have some kind of like mini browser on your phone that just like visits that website or
So yeah, like when you open, so it's like when you open the application, actually it opens Firefox or Chrome,
yeah.
and it closes the website.
Oh
So
yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's what I had in mind because we were.
yeah.
I mean, I haven't never done that yet, but it's something we're also thinking about for this like representation constraint in for the samples. Otherwise, yeah.
Yeah. So do you know of research that has been done on more like open social media, like Mastodon or Blue Sky?
No, I'm not aware of it. It's also a question that we or a comment that we got a lot about the study. Well, yeah, okay, but we would have just found the opposite if you had done it on Blue Sky. So no, I'm not aware that it's been done yet, but I I guess it
I
should.
mean, one of the issue of Blue Sky is that the recommendation algorithm is not designed like Twitter. It's not optimizing for engagement, and I was almost going to say that it because of this it sucks, but it's not as addictive, let's say. So it probably doesn't lead to the same kind of issues.
But I think in general, like platforms like Blue Sky, I think even Truth Social, they should be easier from like a data collection viewpoint, because they're all very similar and relatively accessible data-wise. So it's a discussion we also had with this group of the accelerators. So in some sense, like if you understand how to do one, you could probably extend more
Yeah,
easily to the other.
so we're actually very interested in Blue Sky currently in Tournesol. So one because like the protocol is very open, and so you have these deep functionalities, and
Yeah.
you can just plug in a recommender system. That's what we are trying to build.
Yeah.
And to build the recommender system, you have to read all of the data, and so there's actually a fire hose all of the data that is published. Yeah.
And so the idea would be that people can like also control better what they want to see with
Yeah. So
more open protocols, because one thing we also wonder whether it's like a good or a bad thing for democracies if you let people choose more.
that's exactly our topic. So
That's you can read the manifesto of Tournesol or to watch video that we make, and like that's one of the point of Tournesol. It's like it would be better to give more power to people, but it wouldn't be enough. Christian, you wanted to ask something?
No, it was just a comment about, but it's something that was already covered by Le, about the fact that yes, in Blue Sky there is this possibility to choose other recommender systems, but as far as I'm aware, nobody has yet proposed a different recommendation service that you can plug into Blue Sky.
So actually, so they are called feed generators in the Blue Sky terminology, but there are many basic feeds that have been proposed, essentially like hashtags or stuff like this. And the only, I mean, we're talking about Robin Bergeron from Eurosky who told us, and he only knew of two personalized recommendation algorithms on Blue Sky. And they are the following and the mutual. So it's chronological both, and it's filtering out based on who you're following and who follows you. So
And
definitely room for improvement.
and at some point, Philine, you said that we might have some topic you wanted to discuss with us as well, or some things you were interested in. So please feel free, like, to ask about anything that we might be able to answer.
Yeah, I would be curious to hear your perspective on like regulatory recommendations.
I was going to ask you this question.
I preempted it. Good.
Yeah, actually, we talked about it like in a meeting we had just before, just before the Tournesol talk, and I think our perspective at Tournesol about the regulatory is like we don't believe that recommender system which is good for democracy will spread by itself in that regulatory environment. So that's why in Tournesol we are pushing for like four principles that actually all the algorithms should follow in some way. And one of them is actually the one we just talked about. So the fourth pillar is about we have to make sure that in every recommendation system there is a part of common ground. Like it has to we have to all uh, watch a proportion of content that everyone is is not willing, like is has more probability to watch than others, like to be able to build a common ground. And the question is, how do you decide what is this common ground content? But that's what we're trying to do, and we're trying to answer in Tournesol by collaboratively decide what is and what should be this common ground content.
And from a conceptual viewpoint, how do you see this? Like, because these algorithms are so complex, and I really have the same questions about LLMs. So do we have more like an empiricist view on this, where we develop the algorithm and then we just have some like exposed ongoing audit of like how it recommends or like replies to things? Or would there be also some more like I don't know if like alignment is the right word, but some kind of like you derive some like these pillars that you mentioned, that you would describe them somewhat formally and impose constraints in the recommender system? Or would this be, you see what I mean? Or is it just like
Yeah.
like
Yes.
about
The way we go about this, so and also like what we're doing is like more proposing algorithms for that are like along the four pillars that we defined. And so we're trying so like transparency, security, like valuing thoughtful judgments, and having some common grounds. And essentially we building upon different ideas to have algorithms that are more as much as possible along these lines. And this has led to many research questions. So that has been, I mean, there are many research directions. It's a bit of a mess, but many ideas that you can put, and essentially trying to assess every time like different ideas, how they fall along these different lines. And that's our alignment, I'd say. So I mean, one basic principle is that we want to recommend content of general interest, and by that we mean content that most citizens ideally consider as something that should be recommended a lot to other people. So that's essentially the core principle, the alignment that we're trying to solve. And so typically, like this raises many questions, but like typically one interesting thing that we found out with our data is how do you distinguish between like thoughtful judgments, like when it is that people are actually thoughtfully saying this should be more recommended to others, as opposed to a like and or something that is more like instinctive and it's not clear that it's for everyone, and so on. And we actually, for instance, observe in our data a difference of judgments between people who when they provide just a single judgment, and for the essentially we have a bias towards the left, which is like the positionally left. The video on the left tends to be preferred, as well, like the video that has been assessed for the first time tends to be preferred.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really a bias because you see, if people take more time, if they do the evaluation along many criteria, then the bias disappears.
Okay.
Which I think is quite interesting. So that's one challenge. Another challenge is like people are only going to evaluate a handful of videos, and there are 10 billions, I think, videos on YouTube. So there's a scaling problem. And so like, that's where you have to, we are developed ideas of machine learning, how to generalize based on a few data. And then you have also other problems, like how do you, I mean, security is a big issue if you are trying to have what most people consider as good. The issue is astroturfing, like fake accounts and polluting with this. And so there's a lot of research as well on how to mitigate this.
Yeah, I was going to ask, do you think that, I mean, I know that we're having this discussion in research now where people are worried that there would just be like a swamp of AI generated research papers. So how can you assess quality? I mean, anything that relies on human ratings would probably be hard to implement when, I mean, if we continue with this kind of engagement maximizing business model, it's just a matter of time because we're going to be swamped with LLM generated social media content. And then
So I'm a YouTuber, I make videos, and I'm terrified by this.
I'm a researcher, I'm also terrified by this.
Yeah, I think it's we have to do something. So there's an initiative that's interesting that I mean we are part of. Is so there's been, the Digital Markets Act has these phases, and now there's a phase where they're reviewing what have been happening, and they are calling for amendments to the Digital Markets Act. And so there's this proposal by the Future of Technology Institute, Jean Catan and Lucie Castet and others around People versus Big Tech, who are essentially calling to add, because the Digital Markets Act has a lot about interoperability. So, I mean, the typical example is forcing USB-C to Apple, especially. And the idea that they have is to add demands of interoperability for social media as well, following the Blue Sky model. So, in principle, if the amendment goes through, and if it's applied, that's a lot of if. But if we go to this, then YouTube could be forced to have Tournesol, for instance, as a recommender system. It would be forced to allow any third-party application to show YouTube videos just as the YouTube application does. So I think this would be a huge breakthrough from a legal point of view. So that's our hope, that we're not going to be drowned into AI slopes.
But the thing about AI slop as well is like, I think, I mean, for me, and I think for Tournesol as well, like the question is not really, I mean, I don't care if it's the real Lay, Science for All, who is making a video, or if it's a AI slop, as long as the content is really good. So it's more a question about who is going to evaluate. The big risk is like if the evaluation of the content is done by AI and manipulated by anyone who has power, because after, like, if the content is good for democracy, but has been actually written or taped by an AI, it's, I mean, for me, I prefer AI generated content which is good for democracy than human created content which is bad for democracy. So
I actually was
I think it's all
smiling
about,
because we had this discussion in my political economy of AI class with the students. Think about different countries of the world. For which of these country leaders would you prefer them to be replaced by an AI as of now? And
Exactly.
it was a very fun discussion in class. So no, I completely sympathize with the point. No, I'm just wondering. It's like scales. I think it's the same in research, right? We already have the question of like, how do we distinguish good from bad research?
Yeah.
Now with AI, we're just going to have much more, and the question is,
I mean, the question is like, do we have the human brain power
to
to
like,
evaluate
yeah,
all this content? That's a scaling issue that we have.
yeah, but also like to read it. I mean, even
Yeah.
if you thought of a system where it's just like AI producing science that is evaluated by AI. I mean, are we still like, where are we going to still be in the loop? I think it's an interesting discussion.
I've just reviewed a paper in ICML who was proposing AI for reviews. And
So it's coming. So we will have the answer quite fast. So that's not a problem. We will have to wait just a year or 2 years.
Do you know Refine Inc?
No.
It's actually, I think, at AER, so one of the most important journals in economics, they actually, I think I don't think it's mandatory, but Refine.inc. Yeah, I found it. So they actually start to recommend, they kind of strongly recommend it now that before you publish, you run it through. Did you find it, or should I post it in the chat?
Yeah, so I saw this. ICML also had, when you submitted your paper, you could request an AI review just for you.
Yeah.
The thing, it's actually very helpful.
So on this hopeful note, if anyone has other questions, it's time.
You have time.
Yeah.
I do have other questions if you have time.
Go ahead.
So we've been about legal implications. Like, I don't know if you looked into whether, for instance, your paper could allow to enforce some law, especially the Digital Services Act.
Not, we don't have any specific policy recommendations at this point. So when people ask me this question, I think in some sense, what I find striking is that we're in the year 2026, and a paper that documents that political opinions shift in response to feed algorithms is considered the cutting edge. Yeah, it's like
I know.
Yeah.
I think there's a bit of irony in that, and for me, I mean, people ask me like, what's the political implication? I think the first implication is to ask ourselves, are we comfortable with this situation? Are we comfortable with the situation that we have very intransparent aggregators that show information to billions of people? There's not really a way for us to control this democratically. And as the reactions show, depending on which side it kind of on which side it goes in this particular case, either you're comfortable or not. But it's really, I feel like they're like, to begin with, there just needs to be much more debate about the fact that this matters, and that we probably might want to have more democratic control of what is important things to show. And personally, I think it's even more urgent than ever, because I see the exact kind of discussions replicate with large language models. I mean, it's already now we're in this kind of like which LLM is biased in which direction.
The Digital Services Act, I don't know exactly the phrasing, and I'm not a lawyer, but essentially it forbids recommendation system that present systematic risk. And so, like, we also, we're part of a project on on searching for misogynistic biases that
Mhm.
as a systematic risk, but like ideological radicalization, I think is also definitely
Yeah.
a systematic risk. I had someone I think he was supposed to come, but I gave him a wrong link, unfortunately, uh, and he's not here. But he was he had been looking at Sarah Knafo in Paris. So she's a candidate for mayor in Paris, and he compared just her number of views compared to Rashida Dati. And on Twitter, it was like 10 times more views for accounts that are quite similar. And so he wants to make the case that it's there's an issue here. I don't know exactly how it goes with the legal part, but essentially that there's some. I think what he's arguing for is his case is more like there's a specific twist of the algorithm that has been made to promote Sarek Nafo.
Mhm.
And the question he's been asking me is what kind of evidence would be considered as good from both a scientific and a legal point of view, or any, to I mean, he was talking about like making the same thing as like showing sufficiently evidence so that we could. I mean, you saw what happened in Romania. Like the election was cancelled. Like, is this? Can we like? Can we have what kind of data we need to have this kind of yeah, maybe not election cancellation, but like if there's an election that's clear, like sufficiently clearly due
Manipulation.
to manipulations,
Mhm.
what kind of data would be enough to show this?
I
I
think
don't know if I've,
it's a good question. So I guess like depending on what discipline of whatever like scholars or policy advisors or you would talk to, there's the question of how much would you value synthetic accounts versus actual humans, because evidently you can experiment much better with synthetic accounts. Other than that, I mean, I would have to think about it. I guess it might also be tied to like relevant relative presence, like if you get a random sample of like all posts relevant to. But I think another problem that we have, and it's something that I've been thinking a lot with my co-authors. I mean, everything that we measure now is only marginal effects. We're like already in an equilibrium where social media impacts everyone, and then we're like looking at, okay, what if you switch this versus that? But we're already talking about this in a world where journalists know that there is social media, so they probably already changed their headlines relative
Yeah.
to before. So in some sense, it's so hard in a world where they have such a dominant positions, these platforms, because like what would even be the benchmark? Like, would the media be the right benchmark to say were these candidates more evenly represented in the media? But what if the media was also influenced by the social media? It's like at some point it gets so hard to find a benchmark that is not influenced by this all-encompassing system. So yeah, it's a great question, but it's I guess it's
yes, it's an interesting point that you made because that's also something I've been so like as a science YouTuber, I know I am manipulated by the algorithm because when the topic does not make any view, it does not incentivize me to talk about this anymore. And I feel like much of the radicalization actually comes even more from this. Like you have creators that are politicians that I mean, one there are many cases in all countries in the world, but like whenever a politician is being more radical and they make more views, it incentivizes them to carry on. And so, do you know of any research that has tried to evaluate how much social media are affecting content creators?
Mm.
um I'm not aware. I mean, it would probably be possible because I think there were some changes in the past, right? About like the exact, you know better than me regarding the exact schedules of payments, etc. So, but I'm not sure if this has been exploited. I'm more familiar with this literature regarding the media, like where there's some evidence showing how like journalists react to that because they know that like a hugely important channel to distribute their stories would be like when their stories being like reshared on social media, etc. So there's some research on that, but I don't know for like kind of content creators that are like natively social media, not just like newspapers that are also present on social media.
Okay. Because I might have two projects. So I have one project about like this mathematical model of how I'm trying just to formalize how I see the thing, because essentially you have these viewers that are, well, thanks to your papers, we know, influenced by what they are recommended. But I try just to also model like the content creators as just trying to make a bit more views, and also the recommender systems that also is also trying to push for more views, which, as also you showed, is often like making more extreme content. And so, I mean, this is more theoretical work. I don't exactly know how we can fit this with the data. But another thing, I've been talking to Benoît Rotembourg, like a researcher at INRIA, about this, is because he's doing a lot of analysis of opaque recommender system. And I think one data that has not been looked at and is like the data that we have as content creators. Actually, I'm trying to download it. I'm not sure how to download it easily, but I think analyzing this data also could be something interesting. And I know now a lot of science YouTubers, I mean, several of them would be really interested in like an analysis of this data. So if this is something also you would be interested in looking into, try to.
Yeah,
Maybe
I'm very interested. I mean, just thinking like, how would you actually like get that data? Because it's also probably something that you can't get publicly, right? So you would have to go through the actual creators, like export that for you.
From
Yeah.
the YouTuber who are willing to do it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I-
But the YouTubers,
Yeah,
the science YouTubers are in crisis. I mean, many of them are more and more in crisis mode because the number of views is decreasing in science. So
Is that just for the long videos or also for the shorts?
it's a good question, because most of the science YouTubers I know are making long videos, and there are also like videos from science that are also successful still, but so it's not as clear. But at least in France, like there's a shared belief that like it's not going well. So like I mean, I talked to a few already, but I think many people would be really interested in analyzing, like just gathering this data and doing some analysis, especially
Yeah,
if
no,
it's
I would be very, very interested. I think like over the course of a like research project on this, one would probably try to expand beyond the science YouTubers because in some sense, I mean, I'm not sure if they would be the ones like creating the most problems for like democratic debate. So I would also be very curious to see. I mean, I would probably pay a lot of research money to get the like view statistics of I don't know, like some manosphere influencers to see
yeah.
like the trajectories of like how they.
Yeah, I guess it's so in Tournesol we're trying to more focus on what's going good, but I think it's also I mean, to me it's also terrifying that the quality content is being less recommended.
Mhm.
So I still find it valuable to, to understand, and
Yeah,
the
no,
idea.
no, no. I think just like I'm just like thinking of like an ideal world, you would have this
Yeah,
data
yeah,
of
yeah,
for like
definitely.
many types of creators. No, but I think it's actually a very very cool idea. And I guess the data that you would get from these content creators, it would be longitudinal, right? You would have it over many years.
Ideally, but I've tried to download the data, and I did not find an easy way to download all of the interesting statistics. Um, I haven't spent a lot of time on this, but I mean, at least the Google takeout, where you're supposed to be able to collect all of your data, does not give you in-depth statistics.
Okay.
Of your own channel.
I mean, at least the Google takeout, so on the Google account. Maybe through the YouTube creator statistics page, there are all the buttons. But I was trying to find an easy way so that every YouTuber can easily click 3 buttons and get the data. But so far, I have not been able to get this data. What is this question?
It's about the literature about folk theories by content creator on how the algorithm work. The thing he was talking about before.
Yeah, sorry. It's not specifically about content creators, though. It's more general on folk theories. So this idea of trying to understand how to behave to change what the algorithm is showing you. Yeah, I have another couple of references about folk theories. They are a little bit older, but I think they are more general from when the term was first introduced. So the idea is this popular theorization that I have seen many YouTubers do, even publicly, that, I'm not going to publish this, I'm going to publish that, because this is going to be promoted by the algorithm, or I avoid using certain words in my titles, or I put some words in my titles, so that because I believe that this is what the algorithm wants from me.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it's crazy how YouTuber talks about the algorithm as though it was the god.
It is for them.
It's fascinating because I think in economics and other social sciences, there are some experiments to like educate users on how they can, a bit more like along the lines of the reference that you just sent, also linked to outcomes like polarization, because there's this eternal question: is it like really the algorithm like polarizing you, or does it just, were you polarized all along and it just helps you find it? And there's this paper, I think it's in the AER now, where they asked people on Facebook, I think, to revise their experience just like manually by like using the settings that were available, and they showed that the news consumption, it was just for news websites, it actually becomes less polarized, which is still, I think, rather interesting, because it means a bit like, it speaks a bit to what you said before. If you like ask people to kind of consciously evaluate what they like want to see and how. Let me just like briefly put the reference. So yeah, fascinating. Actually, I can't find it right now. I can send it to you after.
Yeah.
Yeah,
we have enough reading with Christian sending.
Oh, yeah, he's very active.
Yeah, Ale?
No, I was saying maybe you can meet another time to discuss all of this, and because it's getting late.
Yeah, and it's getting long for the live video maybe. So thank you a lot, Philine, for your time. Yeah, I hope we'll talk together soon again. And for those who are listening, we have another Tournesol talk next week, so on the 16th, and another one the 23rd. So same time, Monday, 8 p.m. So yeah. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thanks again. Bye-bye.
Bye.